We have your attention, please. We'll go ahead and proceed with the public hearing. It's scheduled at 6:30 p.m. At this time, I'll read the emergency evacuation procedure. In the event of an emergency evacuation, alarm will sound. Everyone should exit the building by the nearest stairwell in a safe and effective manner. If the nearest stairwell is blocked by smoke, use the other stairwell. Do not use the elevator. Once you've reached the main floor, follow the exit signs to exit the building and quickly proceed away from the building. Be mindful of others evacuating and of emergency vehicles. At this time, if the members of the commission will register your presence by voting yes. Present.
You have 17 present and 4 absent.
Thank you. If Deputy Clerk will read the call for the public hearing.
Notice of public hearing. In accordance with Tennessee Code annotated sections 5-5-105 and 13-7-105, the Board of County Commissioners of Blount County, Tennessee will convene and hold public hearing on January 8, 2013 at 6:30 p.m. at the Blount County Courthouse Commission meeting room for the following proposed amendments to the zoning resolution of Blount County, Tennessee, being Resolution 00-06-010, and specifically the zoning map of Blount County, Tennessee. A resolution to amend the zoning map of Blount County, Tennessee from R2, Rural District 2, to R1, Rural District 1, for a portion of the property located at 6250 Paul Boone Road. The property is identified on tax map 126 and parcel 079.00 and is shown hatched on the map below.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. Anyone in the audience that wishes to speak at the public hearing, if they'll please come forward and identify themselves. Seeing no one, we declare the public hearing closed.
I'm calling to order the Agenda Committee meeting for January the 8th, 2013. Commissioner Samples and Commissioner Lambert are both out of tonight's meeting due to illness, and County Clerk Roy Crawford cannot attend tonight due to illness as well. Will everyone here please register your presence?
You have 17 present and 4 absent.
18. At this time, I'll take any public input of items on the agenda. Seeing no hands, we will now move on for approval of the agenda committee minutes from December 11th, 2012 meeting. Do I have a motion? We have a motion by Mr. Harrison and seconded by Mr. Carver. Please vote to approve the minutes of December the 11th.
You have 18 yes.
Minutes from December 11th, 2012 meeting are hereby approved. At this time, I will move for setting of the agenda. Motion made by Mr. Melton. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. French. Any discussion about the agenda for tonight? Seeing no discussion. Mr. Helton, I missed your red little button. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a resolution to amend the zoning map of Blount County from R1 Rural District to commercial is the way the heading is. Now, it's not going to commercial, so that's why I'm wondering why the heading's that way.
The heading was incorrect.
This particular resolution, what we'd like to do is move it back to the Planning Commission, let them take a look at it. We got some wording incorrect on it. I assume you're talking about G4. And having said that, I guess, is it proper to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, at this time on G4?
My recommendation is we just leave it on the agenda. Then when it gets to that item, then we'll at that time entertain a motion to move it back to Planning Commission. Does that satisfy you, Mr. Helton? Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mark.
Mr. Hasty? Mr. Hasty is a yes on that.
Okay. You have 19 yes and 2 absent.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will move to item E1. Is there any special recognitions? I don't have any. Clerk. Then we'll move on to E2, appointments. I'll entertain a motion regarding item E2. Commissioner Lael has asked to combine E2A through E2E forward as one item. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Farmer. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote to move items E2A through E forward to the full commission.
You have 19 yes, 0 no.
Very well. Item E2F is information only. We'll now then move forward to item G1, budget transfers. If you'll just give me a second to get caught up in my paperwork. I'll entertain a motion for highway, roads, and bridges, $26,000. Motion made by Mr. Moon, seconded by Mr. Carver. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Mr. Wright, Mr. Foltz.
You have 19 yes, 0 no.
Very well. Motion shall be forwarded to the main. Mr. French, would you like to, do you have a question, Mr. French? I'll entertain a motion to move. The next item that I have is amending the general liability fund for $109,944.50.
Mr. Chairman, I move items G1, B through I on the full commission.
Commissioner Melton seconds. Mr. Moon made the motion. Mr. Foltz, you're recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just have a question for Mr. Brignard on this.
Go ahead with your question, Mr. Foltz.
Let's take item G as an example, because most of these are basically, you're doing the same thing. I just want to make sure I understand what's going on here. All of these items will still appear as costs in the 101 fund. Am I correct there? They'll appear as expenses in the 101 fund.
That is correct. The gist of what I'm presenting here is the comptroller's request that we separate our insured products from our self-insured products. All of them were previously accounted for within Fund 263. And I was presenting this to the Budget Committee and consequently the full commission, so you would have a better understanding of our carrying out that direction.
Okay, so now we're going to have two funds, one for self-insured and one for the kinds of things we buy insurance for. Is that it?
Fund 263 will remain our general liability account, and our insured property and casualty will be accounted for there. Fund 264 will be our self-insured health fund.
Okay.
And Fund 266 will be our workers' compensation, which is self-insured.
Okay, that makes it much cleaner and neater. I agree. Good move. Okay, and all of this stuff still appears on the expense lines of the departments incurring the expenses.
Yes,
Good.
sir.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, please vote to move items G1B through G1I forward to the full commission.
You have 19 yes, 0 no.
At this time, we'll now move to budget increases. Item G2. I'll entertain a motion regarding items G2A, a $10,556 adult education grant. Motion made by Mr. Lael, seconded by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion? Mr. Foltz, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just have another question on this. Let's take D as an example, the general liability accounting.
Mr. Foltz, we're only doing A on this, and I believe the original motion by Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Lael was just for adult education grant. Any other discussion about item G2A? Seeing none, please vote.
Have 19 yes, 0 no.
That item G2A shall be forwarded on to the full commission. I'll now then go to item G2B, Arts Subsidy Grant for $6,432. Motion made by Mr. French. Second by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote.
Nineteen yes, 0 no.
Item G2B shall be forwarded on to the full commission. Now they go into item G2C, $12,000 reduction for the endowment to the children's home. Entertain a motion for that. Motion made by Mr. Melton, seconded by Mr. Carver. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote.
Nineteen yes, 0 no.
Motion shall be forwarded on to the full commission. Next is, I'll take a motion for item G2D, $179,683 for the general liability. Do I have a motion? Motion made by Mr. Farmer. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Mr. Wright. Mr. Fultz, you are recognized now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another question here. We're taking money out of fund balance in this insurance fund and allocating it to various expenses. Fund balance, is that just the reserve, essentially the insurance reserve that we're moving the money out of?
Well, Mr. Vineyard, you're now the lit.
Yes, sir. There's about a little over $600,000 worth of fund balance in this fund at this time. And my staff, frankly, had not done what they should have done in conferring with the risk management staff about what that budget should have been. So this fixes it.
Last year, we had a lot of discussion about the potential problems with the solvency of the general liability fund and the workman's, I guess mostly the general liability fund was the problem. How do we stand there? Is that looking pretty good now?
For where we are in this point in time of the year, there's nothing out of the ordinary that seems to be happening on that front. So, that's at this point in time.
Looks good. I translate that to me, I hope. Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion on item G2D? Seeing no discussion, please vote to forward it on to the full commission.
You have 19 yes and 0 no.
Item shall be forwarded on to the full commission. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for item G2E, health and benefit, $160,000. Motion made by Mr. Farmer, seconded by Mr. Lael. Any discussion? Mr. Fultz, you are recognized, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry to ask all these questions, but I'd like to understand what's going on here. Insurance recovery, how does that come about?
Mr. Vineyard, give me 1 second, okay?
We have reinsurance as part of our plan design for large claims in our health plan, and you're paying out first dollar on all these claims as they result. When they hit those caps, then the reinsurance writes us a check to reimburse us for that amount in excess of the cap.
Gotcha, thanks.
And we had been putting it in a revenue account rather than putting it back against the expense.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other lights, please vote to forward G to E on to the full commission.
You have 19 yes, 0 no.
Item shall be forwarded on to the full commission. At this time, I have nothing underneath other budget items, so we will now move forward to item G4, and I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Wright?
I move that we move this back to the planning commission. There's a couple of items that we need to correct before, and what I'd like to do is defer it until February's meeting.
I'll second that.
All right, Mr. Wright, I'm trying to understand here. You've made a motion to refer it back to planning, but you also made a motion to defer it to next month's meeting. If you can only do one or the other.
Well, we've got 60 days, so we'll have to make the next meeting, agenda meeting. Let me rephrase the motion to move it back to the planning commission, and we'll handle it there.
All right. Mr. Fultz, you had seconded that motion. Are you still in agreement with that?
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr. Kirby, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why should this go back to the planning commission? Planning
I didn't make the motion, Mr. Kirby. And Mr. Wright can answer. He made the motion, and I'll recognize him.
I think we need to get the planning commission to take a look at it. Are you saying just move it to the next meeting, defer it to the next meeting? Is that what you're saying? If that's true, then we can do it either way, whatever the commission wants to do.
We don't need to send it back to the planning commission. We can move it to next month's work agenda and bring forward the right paperwork, and then move it on to the full commission.
Well, I'll change my motion to reflect moving it or deferring it. Is that what you want? To the next meeting. That's in February. And we can correct the necessary things that needs to be done during that period of time.
All right, I've got the board lit. I'm gonna just so everybody understands exactly where we are. We have a motion that was first made by Mr. Wright to remove this back to the planning commission, seconded by Mr. Fultz. During discussion with Mr. Kirby, Mr. Wright has now then seeks to amend his motion to just defer the item to the February agenda meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Wright?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Fultz, are you willing to accept that amended deferral?
I guess I'm a bit confused here. Somebody's got to make changes to make this resolution accurate. In my understanding of how things work, only the planning commission can make those changes.
So no, you're not agreeing to his amendment?
No, I think it has to go back to the planning commission because they're the only people that have the power to make the changes to correct this.
Thank you, Mr. Fultz. So right now we have a motion to amend made by Mr. Wright. Do I have a second for that motion to amend?
You got a second.
Second made by Mr. Kirby. Now then I will entertain discussion on the motion to amend, which is to defer this to next month's agenda meeting. Mr. French, your button is lit. Would you like to discuss this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm confused because in my bookmark section, it says G4 is rezoning from R2 to R1 for the property at 6250 Paul Boone Road, which is what we just held the public hearing on. In the text of my agenda, it's got a resolution to move from R1 rural district to commercial property at 8523 Townsend Lane. Do we not have to have a public hearing on that before we do anything with that? Before we this one here? When, last month, 3 months ago?
Yeah,
Pardon me?
we had a public meeting on where we have run into problems, Mr. French, is that we have run into a second situation where the planning department has given us a call, which has been publicly put into the newspaper, read, in which we've held a public meeting on, but the call does not match the documentation that's in our packet. So what they have given us is an improper map and a document that does not, what they've given us is a document that does not correspond to the public call. So what we have at issue here is we can defer this to next month because the call has not changed. The call has not changed.
Understand that.
Just the documentation that we need to refer to in our packet is the incorrect documentation.
So the resolution that I'm looking at right now shouldn't even be in there.
Correct.
Okay.
Now then,
Understood.
does that answer your question, at least,
Yes,
at
yes,
least
sir.
some part of this one? Now then, I'm going to answer Mr. Kirby here in a second, but there's still a question that the map that was used in the call is not the correct map. And my understanding is only the Planning Commission can change that because that's how it came from Planning Commission. Now, does Mr. Kirby or Mr. Wright have any correct information as to whether or not the map is correct that was part of the call? Mr. Kirby, I'm going to recognize you. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I bring Roger Fields forward?
Most certainly may.
Roger, you come forward, please.
By the time he gets up here, we'll have the microphone on so he can start talking.
Okay. Tell us about the map, Mr. Roger.
That is my error. Both of these are my error, and I humbly apologize. The map, when you look at it, there's a bottom section there that is actually two separate properties. It's hard to, when you're looking at the tax map that I was working from, it's hard to decipher. And I didn't pick it up until the neighbor called me. He was wanting to see if his would qualify, and I've not reviewed his property, so it may or may not at a later date. But his property was actually in that hatched area, and that's when I picked up on it. Thank goodness. And I do have corrected maps made and ready to go for the corrections.
Okay, the map you brought before the Planning Commission is the map, the corrected map, or was that map correct that you brought before the Planning Commission that we moved?
No, that map was incorrect.
Incorrect?
Yes.
So, does this need to go back to Planning Commission to correct that map?
I talked with John Lamb on it, and really it would probably be best. And I've talked with the applicant, and he's okay with it, with the added delay.
Okay, we bring it back to Planning Commission and correct the maps. Do we have to have another public hearing and then have another public hearing in here for the people, just like we
Correct.
went through?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fields, the property involved, is it on this map?
It is on that map, yes.
And you actually hatched just a little bit more than what should have been. What I'm trying to
Yeah,
avoid,
it's-
Mr. Fields, if we can defer it to next month and put the proper paperwork with it, if it goes back and has substantial change by the Planning Commission, we have to hold another public hearing. That means we have to advertise it again and pay for it again.
I understand.
I really don't see making substantial change. if
It's
you-
actually going to be shrinking the hatched area that was already approved. There'll be less property in the hatched area.
But the affected area is definitely covered?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Fields, I'm going to try and summarize just what you, Mr. Farmer, Mr. Kirby have gone through for the benefit of myself and others. The wording of the call is correct, that it's only for tax map 126 parcel 79, correct?
Yes.
It's only for one parcel of land that we would be moving to R2 to R1.
Yes.
What is incorrect is you shaded, basically you colored outside of the area.
I got outside the lines, yes.
Okay. But the full area is, all of what set parcel 79 is.
It is included in that shaded area.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fields. What we have, gentlemen, what we have, commissioners, is we can either send this back to planning if we believe that this is a substantial error. We can send this all the way back to planning. Or if we believe that the call and the map was sufficient to give people notice of tax map 126 parcel 79, sufficient public notice of the change and the desire to speak, we can defer, let the proper information get in, because the map does in fact show that one parcel. But we can defer to get the proper paperwork into our packets. And that's the question that is before you right now on the motion to amend, was to just defer this to the next month's meeting. If you vote in the affirmative, it will stay here, not go back to planning, and Mr. Fields will bring back additional documentation to correct the resolution and bring a proper map. If you vote no, then the default will be for it to go all the way back to Planning Commission and start the course again. So, Mr. Lewis?
I think that the issue will be trying to explain this in 5 years if a question came up. My suggestion would be to send it back, get it correct the first time, and bring it back so there's not a question going forward.
Mr. Fultz, you're recognized.
Yeah, I'm of the same mind here, and I'm confused as to what resolution we're correcting. The resolution we have in our package, 1301-005, is rezoning from rural 1 to commercial. I mean, you can't correct this without sending it back to the Planning Commission. This resolution has, as near as I can tell, nothing to do with what's really on the agenda here. So, yeah, this needs a restart, or nobody's going to be able to figure it out.
Commissioner Merle?
I was just going to make the same comment. The resolution in the packet says rural 1 district to commercial. It's very confusing. So I think also it needs to be sent back.
Mr. Wright?
I just wanted to mention, we've got a 60-day period here. Can we still get on the Planning Commission? Yeah.
We could still get on the Planning Commission for this month.
Okay.
And the 60-day period, are you talking about the 60 days in our zoning regulations? Yeah. That applies to permits issued by the BZA, be it a variance or a special exception. That wouldn't apply to this situation.
Okay, so we can go more than 60 days without it being automatically approved?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Seeing no other lights, we are going to vote on the amendment to defer this item to next month's agenda meeting. A vote in the affirmative is to defer. A vote no will be to go back to the main motion, which was to send it back to the Planning Commission. Please vote.
You have 4 yes, 15 no.
Okay. The main motion on the amendment fails. The main motion on the floor is to defer this issue back to the Planning Commission. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote to send this back to the Planning Commission. Motion
19 yes.
Motion G4 is hereby sent back to the Planning Commission. I'll now entertain a motion for item G5, approval of the 2012 roads list. Motion made by Mr. Helton, seconded by Mr. Carver. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Commissioner Kirby?
I have 19 yes, 0 no.
At this time, I'll take public input of items not on the agenda. Seeing no hands. Anybody need to make any announcements? Mr. French, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to let the commission know there will be an education committee meeting at the Everett Learning Center Thursday at noon. And for you members that generally plan to eat lunch where we meet, they have no lunchroom there, so you better eat before you come, bring something to eat, or make plans on eating afterwards.